Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Payment Strategy Show. I'm Joshua Silver, founder and CEO of Rainforest. We help software platforms embed payment processing into their core products to grow revenue and improve customer retention. I am here today with Dwayne Gefferie. Dwayne is a payment strategist who specializes in helping payments companies scale. I had the privilege of meeting Dwayne recently at FinTech Meetup a few weeks back in Las Vegas, and I immediately knew that we wanted to have him on the show because of his depth of knowledge around data, risk management. It's really unmatched, and his insights are highly relevant to all of our SaaS platform listeners. So, Dwayne, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's a great honor.
So, to get us started, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you first get into payments?
Absolutely. Let's see. I think it's been over 2 decades right now. I think 22 years this summer. Was actually just graduated out of high school and had a summer job at a local bank, like fixing their intranet. Then after that job was done, they said, "Hey, we have another small project for you. You're good with computers. Why don't you go check it out?" And it was at a credit card company called ABN AMRO Credit Cards in the Netherlands. I was basically taking over somebody who was on pregnancy leave at that time. I started really enjoying what I was doing. I was doing management information systems, which basically meant that I was taking all of the data that they were getting every single day, which was dumped in a big sort of like file type of database, and I download all of those PDFs and then manually put them in there. And I learned the numbers behind the payments game, right? So everything from how many credit cards we had outstanding, the fees that we were collecting, but also interchange and scheme fees and everything with it. So I got an education on that from the numbers perspective. And because of that, and because I was a very curious guy, I started asking questions and I started learning especially the issuing game from that perspective. But throughout the years, I worked at a couple of other Dutch banks, ING Bank, Rabobank in the wealth division as well. And I ended up back in payments after I went back to university actually and got a degree. I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in data science at that time. And I landed at a company called Adyen as their first data scientist. So within that role, I was in the acquiring team where you card scheme managers on one side and you had the actual engineers on the other side, and nobody was really talking to each other. So I came in and actually had to fix the problems or solve some of the issues that they had on the platform. And that gave me an even deeper knowledge into acquiring, right? Really going into the nitty gritty, reading every single manual I could get my hands on and solving problems every single day. We were hyper scaling at that time. So it was a great time to be there. I ended up building 7 acquiring banks, everything from New Zealand, Australia, Singapore to other regions as well. It was a great experience. And then throughout my career, I ended up going through the promotions that I had, became a VP of data science and analytics at a company called checkout.com in the UK. And then I ran a consultancy firm actually for over 6 years called Data Bright, which I set up myself together with a business partner of mine. And there we helped over 50 different acquirers build out their acquiring platforms, leverage data, build new products and services. Many of them are still doing fantastically well, and hopefully because of some of the products and the services that we provided over there. And then for the last 2 years, I've basically been writing about payments online, especially on LinkedIn, as well as on my newsletter as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Almost all my guests who have been in payments for a while fell into it. So it sounds like you had a job in high school, you fell into it accidentally, you got sucked into the vortex, and then after college came back. Very common amongst payment professionals. And also, I think another theme I hear quite a bit is there was no one that kind of sat you down and taught you everything you need to know. The apprenticeship model, it's really asking a lot of questions, reading as many manuals as you can, and just trying to figure it out. Degree of common sense, if you will, maybe in payments, I think how most people got into it. Clearly, Dwayne, throughout your career, data has been at the forefront. Almost every job you've done, I think, has been centered around data. What kinds of data do you think is most important in payments? And maybe even to expand on that, what do you think is the most underrated? What is data that people should be looking at that they aren't? I think we all obviously look at headline numbers, GMV or total processing volume, average transaction size, very basic vanity metrics, if you will. But going a level 2, 3, 4 deeper, what are those statistics that people should be looking at, and what can the data tell us?
Okay, so a lot to unpack over there, but I think for me, whenever I build a lot of these data infrastructures, and I think the data that management gets at their top level is very aggregated data, indeed, like what you're saying, volumes data, number of transactions. But I always like to break it down all the way to actual data. So surprise, but I like log data. And people are like, what do you mean about log data? Actual the event data of what's happening. Because when data is in its rawest forms, when I just know, hey, nobody's touched this data, nobody's aggregated it, nobody's given it a different name. This is exactly what it is. Of course, depending on how you write your code and how you like store things, that's really where the nitty gritty is. So every single acquirer that I've built these data platforms for, doesn't matter if it's checkout.com or that is at Adyen, we always went down and say, what's the rawest form that we can actually find? And oftentimes you find in the log data, you work with developers to actually say, hey,
Yep.
every single thing that you do doesn't even, you might think it's insignificant. Even the calculation of a scheme fee component to me is relevant because I can down the line do something great with that, or I can aggregate it into a report, or I can get to an accuracy level that others are not able to get to because they're operating on this aggregated basis. So I think that to me is always that I say, hey, that's the most underrated. That's what people should be focusing on. And I think when it comes to metrics, I think the metrics that has been the pivotal part, especially on the acquiring side for me for the last decade, has been the authorization rate. Because I think authorization rate is what I call that one metric to measure for excellence for any type of company. Volume is going to be there, revenue is going to be there, but the authorization rate is actually the company's ability to take the transaction and get it to completion. If you're in the POS space, you probably get higher auth rates because there's a lot decline than if you're in the online space. Nowadays, we have so many value added services that you can add to it. If I'm measuring that, that's my daily score. And can I benchmark it against others? Can I benchmark it against other acquirers or among my own merchants or across MCCs? What can I do to make that number rise every single year? And if it's declining, why is it declining? Am I taking on more risk? Am I taking on the wrong type of merchants? Is my reputation overall as an acquirer diminishing because my profile and my risk portfolio is different? So for me, that's always been that one metric to measure that. If I'm focusing on that, everything else will be okay.
I love that. Authorization rate, so key. One thing that we see a lot at Rainforest when ISV's platforms are coming over to us is either they don't know what their authorization rates are or calculate, and they're asking basic questions. But I also see a lot of people calculating them in different ways. You might have one cardholder that tries the same transactions 4 times in a row. Does that count as 4 declines, or does it count as 1 decline and you finally got a good one? So thinking about deduplication, thinking about it done at a cardholder level, at a payment intent or transaction type level, payment setup level, I think all of those things become interesting, and probably we don't have time today to get into the nuance of those calculations, but I'd encourage anyone out there listening, engage with Dwayne, myself, others on LinkedIn. How should we be calculating this as an industry?
Yeah.
That's one thing I saw in the healthcare space is over time, people started to get much more, hospitals started to get much more uniform about how they were calculating the same metrics. So you could do apples to apples, as opposed to Adyen calculates it one way and Stripe calculates it another way and Rainforest does it another way. Really hard to calculate. So authorization rates is number one.
Yeah. No,
Gotcha.
absolutely. You cannot change or you cannot improve what you don't measure accurately. If you're not saying, look, every single decline is still a decline. My auth rate number might look lower, but at least I'm looking at it. And then you can always say, okay, what's the secondary metric behind it? If I still get to an authorization rate, yes, I can aggregate it and I can say, hey, this is a great number. But internally, at least within the company, I need to make sure that I understand what's behind that number. And again, it's an aggregate number. It's not the actual number. It's an aggregate number. It's a reduced number to maybe become a vanity metric at one point. So I think if you're pure at it, and you understand it, then you can improve it. And then you can say, hey, why do we need 2 or 3 tries before we get to the actual authorization? Why can't we skip it? Why can't we improve it? Why can't we predict what it's going to do and then do the thing that we need to do so that we can get to the result that we want to have?
Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to drill into the details, because you might realize when you do that, Visa and MasterCard authorization rate is just fine. It's really Amex's rate that's declining or vice versa. So I think getting 2 or 3 levels deeper is critical.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about, you've written extensively on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan and follower of your writing. You not only do teardowns of different payments companies, but also I think often take contrarian views on things. You've talked a little bit before about the embedification of payments. I'd love to hear from you. What are some software companies that you think have done it really well? And what do you think's contributed to the success of those forerunners?
Yeah. I think if we look at really the software companies who've done it the best, in my opinion, I think there's probably two, maybe three of them that really come into mind. There's a couple of other ones, but I think Shopify is the number one in my book,
Yeah.
right? Shopify to me is, even though they might not have set out to become that from day one, they've been the one who've adopted most to where their business model and where the value is actually being captured for that platform, and then still building great things around it. I think a great other company that I see so much of, and I hope that they expand globally even more, is a company called Toast. I love what they're doing. I love the width and just being able to be in that retail and hospitality space and just being able to go at it. Being in London as well as in Europe, I already see other competitors who are saying, hey, because they're taking so long, we're just going to build it. I think, yeah, there's a couple of other companies that are doing really great. I think Uber does great, even though we might not look at them in that perspective, but they're a great payments company actually, right? Because they have this service up front, but they have licenses across the world. They work with some of the biggest acquirers in the world, and they do payouts as well and all these other financial products. So many of those are, to me, very interesting to look at, and especially their evolution of, we came in trying to solve X and then ended up having to work with Y, basically, which is the payments aspect, and now it's just become such a part of our DNA and such a big part of what we do, but we're not a payments company, basically.
Have you seen the landscape evolve over the last couple of years? What are people doing across the board today better than they were doing 3, 5, 8 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I think the biggest change for me, and I think this started around 2015, 2016. I was at Action working on a lot of it. And a lot of the projects that I got involved in were those projects with the likes of a Spotify or Uber. And they were bringing us in and wanted to talk about acquiring and saying, hey, how can we work on it? Those were the early stages, right? Where we were working together and solving all of those problems. But you also needed to have a very big number for us to even get out of our chair and want to have that conversation. I remember those numbers were in the billions, right? If you didn't have at least $1 billion, at least through one payment method like Visa or MasterCard, then why would we even entertain it? It has to move the needle. I think what I'm seeing right now is that it's coming down, right? That number is not billion anymore. I saw 100 million maybe a couple of years ago where people are like, hey, we're doing embedded payments, we're an ISV, we're doing 100 million. Oh, that's interesting. I see that number down even further, 50 million. I've seen the likes already at an early stage already talking about, hey, we're not even doing 10 million and we already want to embedify payments. And of course, I think with other companies providing those type of solutions, that's a great way. So I see that a lot more, where companies are just at an earlier stage understanding the significance and the importance of embedding payments and just making that seamless transaction happen and just making it a part of their DNA of their company.
Let's go now a little bit deeper on an area that I know close to home for you, which is fraud. You recently published an article, The $400 billion Problem, where you talk about the huge amount of fraud that is happening today and over the next decade, how it's just going to continue to explode. Obviously, you talk through different types of user-initiated fraud, app fraud, all the different types out there. Can you just share maybe a few examples of what you are seeing in the fraud space, and why are traditional defenses falling short? We've had fraud companies that have nominally been using machine learning, and I use air quotes for that, for 2 decades now, almost as long as you and I have been in payments. We've seen that, but it feels like we've entered a new era recently. Help me unpack.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is that fraud is escalating, right? It's, again, I'm in Europe, so we think that we solved everything with PSD2, entering some 3DS, and that's it. I look at fraud at a much bigger thing than just a chargeback problem or friendly fraud problem. The $400 billion numbers is actually an extrapolation of the $40 billion a year that companies are on fraud every single year. And I think what we need to realize is that the traditional defenses that we have set out in place, especially at acquirers and payments companies, is very much logic based, right? It's often rule based type of things. If this, then that. Very rudimentally. Just think about it. Like, most companies will say, oh, we have a fraud score, which does some magic with some numbers. It's a little black box, but then it still goes into a rule-based engine that says if score is above X, then basically just block the transaction. If it's between those thresholds, maybe if you're smart, you have another rule that says, okay, apply 3DS if you have that, but oftentimes it's just a score and then we're dealing with it. I think what we're seeing now is that, especially with AI and just sophistication in the techniques that fraudsters are using across the world, and especially the global aspect of it, right? It's that it's becoming so sophisticated. They have synthetic identity, you have real-time scams, you have lover scams. There's so many different things. And then also cross payment methods as well. Scammers are evolving. They're utilizing every single thing that they have. They read the research that we write. They see those things as well. They're anticipating on that. And then they're leveraging the AI because they don't have a board telling them, let's hold off on the AI. They're going at it at a faster pace. They're doing scams at scale now, right? Where it's happening so fast. And I think those are some of the things that I'm seeing. On the other side, what I think is also a little bit of a challenge or a problem is that the defenses are not coming from the payments companies themselves. And what I mean with that, it's the best solutions that I'm seeing in the market are actually the solutions that the networks are providing, right? Networks are actually investing in embedding AI models into their own networks or creating or buying companies who have those types of solutions and then applying it to the industry instead of those payments companies saying, hey, wait a second, we're actually the owner of the relationship with the merchant. We see most of the data. We have our internal data. We need to start being much more sophisticated on that. And I think those to me are two challenges. You have, on one hand, you have the fraudsters, the scammers who are out there utilizing the best techniques. And on the other side, you have the networks who are doing it and then selling into the other products. But the companies that are actually supposed to be the first line of defense are failing to actually be that defense.
I agree with you. We are seeing some incredibly sophisticated scams. You go back 10 years ago, it was a very simple type of scam. Now there's 2, 3, 4 parties involved, fake parties. Just the level of complexity that people, the bad actor side, have architected is phenomenal. It's unfortunate they're on the bad actor side instead of working on our side, but it certainly makes us have to put up formidable defenses. One of the recommendations that you've made that really resonated with me is using industry collaboration and data sharing. Can we just talk about that for a second?
Absolutely. I've worked with data for a very long time. And especially when I had my data science and analytics consultancy firm, I went down the rabbit hole of building out those data infrastructures, right? Like really taking companies who have been on premise for a very long time in the back room on a server. Nobody's allowed to touch it. And then all of a sudden I'm coming in and saying, hey, we need to have all of that data in the cloud and we need to store it to these Snowflake or Redshift or BigQuery databases because then we can actually do things with them. I think that's where we need the industry to go to as well. And especially a concept which is called data sharing that I thought was very interesting that a company called Snowflake actually introduced was that, yes, you can have your own proprietary data and things that are important to you, but there are things, or it can be scams, or it can just be points within the data that you're analyzing, trends that you're seeing, patterns that you're seeing that others could benefit from as well. And I think it's being able to share that data or at least share those insights with your colleagues. Yes, we have a lot of conferences and we get together and we talk about it, but we're still very secretive about how we're doing things or which technologies we're using or which technologies we're not using, basically. But I think there needs to be at least an organization, or there needs to be at least an ability for companies to come together and say, how do we share those typologies? How do we share those risk models, generic risk models, right? Look at what we're seeing with generative AI is that, yes, there are the ones who have proprietary models, but then we also have the ones who are open sourcing it. Like, why aren't we open sourcing some of those things, or at least semi open sourcing, saying you have to be a payments company, you have to have data, you need to pour in, we can develop better models, and we can all protect each other a lot more. And we need to talk about it all the time. I think one of my panels at FinTech Meetup was that, and there we had some great voices that just shared great opinions on that. And I fully believe that we should do it. And I also think it needs to be international, right? Like we tend to be very focused on just the US or just Europe. No, a lot of the scams are happening in the US. Then it's easy. Hey, that works over there perfectly. What can we do over here in Europe, or the other way around? What is happening in Europe that they can apply into the United States or even in other regions as well, where fraud is on the rise as well?
At Rainforest, in addition to trying to share as much data back and forth as we can, one other thing we've seen is that incorporating data from the software platforms into the merchant onboarding and management and transaction monitoring makes a huge difference. Even something as basic as knowing this is a free account or a paid account or a trial, longevity of the account, how much they're utilizing it. Those types of signals we found to be very highly predictive of fraud. I'm actually surprised other companies aren't doing that. I think software platforms tell us we're leading the way. And I'm like, this isn't rocket science. I know that we're maybe being a bit smart about it, but At the same time, that data is out there, but I think it's a matter of these legacy systems weren't built to incorporate data from external elements. Even something like Stripe Radar, which is built in, very limited capabilities to take in any external data. And I think that's just a huge limitation.
Yeah. I think there are legacy systems, but we sometimes need to recognize that we have legacy mindset within this industry. It's is your director of compliance not has he or she been in that same position for the last 20 years? And it's like, "Oh, if it's not broken, let's not try to fix it." Whereas the young guy who just comes into and says, "Hey, we should connecting all of these data points because we can see so much more." I think that's something that we need to address as well, right? We need to be able to say, "Hey, are we doing this because we don't have the infrastructure, or are we doing this because the mindset doesn't want to shift?" I've been in companies that were on the brink of they called me in and said, "Hey, we're on the brink of bankruptcy." And I came in, put up some great designs and said, we should be doing this, that, and a third. And we're going to be capturing a lot of market share when we can grow. Only for somebody to say, we're working with this system. We still have 24 months. If we want to create a ticket, it's going to take this long. I don't think we should bother. And then in the meanwhile,
they're going bankrupt.
Yeah, the company's going bankrupt. They're collecting their salary. And then they're like, oh, I'm 2 years out to my pension, so I'll be doing that. I think it goes hand in hand. It's like a digital.
That complacency.
I think mindset needs to be changed before you actually change the technology, because if you change the technology but not the mindset, people are just going to go back to what they were doing.
Couldn't agree more. Let's move on from fraud. I wanted to cover a couple other topics before we wrap up. I hear the term orchestration thrown around a lot. I think you have a particularly unique, deep understanding of what orchestration really is and the different models that make orchestration valuable. Can you just walk us through what some of those different models are and why you think they're valuable?
Yeah. So for a lot of people, orchestration might sound like this brand new concept, right? But it's not. Orchestration has been in technologies for decades, and even orchestration in payments was derived from just orchestrations within IT. But if we look at orchestration, it really just involves managing and optimizing the payments processes across hopefully multiple providers and multiple payment methods. That's what we're basically trying to do. We're trying to say, what's that goal? Again, bringing it back to the authorization rate. If our goal is to provide our customer with the best possible result, when I was at Adyen and even at checkout.com, we had multiple acquirers already. We weren't acquired, but we already had other relationships. We weren't always the best, right? Especially in the beginning, we weren't always the best. So oftentimes, was actually the other acquirer who was getting the bulk of that volume, but then we would get the retries or we would get the other thing. It's about having that fallback system, that fall over management that you have by applying smart routing. In the beginning, you do very basic stuff. You send half it to one, half other one, and then you compare. Over time, you become what I call a little bit smarter in your routing. You say, if this variable, let's say, for instance, if the region is the US, send it to the US acquiring because we'll get a higher authorization rate. And if we send it to our European acquirer setup that we have. So it was all of those different things that you have. And I think over time, that becomes a lot more intelligent, right? So you see different models come into there as well, where the logic becomes smarter as well, because it's not just the region, but it's the region, the time zone that it needs to happen, the type of method that it is. If it's e-com or POS, what do you then need to have? And then when you want to get to the advanced level of it, that's when you really start using other algorithms, right? You can use a multi-banded algorithm to really optimize where you got traffic based on the results. You're doing statistical analysis or machine learning, as we nowadays want to call it, to really optimize those models and really get into it. But overall, orchestration is nothing more than just saying, hey, something is coming in. I want to get the best result out of it. Where do I send it so I get that result? Because that result is all that matters to me.
Sense of what payment volume do you need to have for it to make sense? Because I often hear startups, for example, on day one talking about orchestration. I'm like, why don't you worry about getting your first payment taken first before you worry about splitting traffic 17 ways? So where do you draw the line and say, hey, it's at this volume, is it $1 billion? Is it 5 billion? At what volume does it start to make sense to look at orchestration, given that?
Yeah, so having much more of a consultative mindset, then what I always do is I say, look, It depends on the phase that you are in as a company. Because if you're at a startup, if you're a startup, you're just getting started. Let's say you just build a new AI or something and you just want to get it to mass. It doesn't make sense to have orchestration because your only goal is growth, right? So you just want to send as many transactions through as possible. But as that growth continues, let's say you're starting to hit, I always want to say you want to have at least at the minimum a good statistical number. Yes, 1,000 transactions is a statistical number, but is it 1,000 transactions per month, per week, or per day? And I even think if you're doing 1,000 transactions a day, that's a good number because you can run experiments. You can split it up 50-50 and do it at it. But I think as you grow, as that number grows, then the opportunities for orchestration really start showing up. So I don't even look at the gross volume that much. There should be some volume there at least. If you're not doing micro transactions, there should be at least something there. But I would say probably at a minimum 1,000 transactions a day. So again, that's 30,000 a month. Yeah, 365,000. You can run a lot of experiments. You can route a lot of transactions in that level. That's where I really look at it. As you see companies grow, the type of orchestration then becomes the difference maker, right? Because again, what are you trying to improve? Am I trying to get a better authorization rate because I'm at an early stage and I want to make sure that every dollar that I can make actually comes into it? Or do I want to optimize so that I can get the best cost possible, right? So I don't want to have excessive retries, but I want to make sure that I get the right exact authorization, but the cost is not that relevant for me. That's mostly when you're scaling up, when you're just saying, hey, we just want to make sure that we're hitting what we need to hit over time as well. But it could also be fraud related, right? If you're operating in multiple regions, you're maybe a little bit more of a high risk type of thing, then you're optimizing for those two things as well. But then you add the risk aspect to it as well. So I really believe that depending on what stage you are in and what you're trying to get as the output, those are really the most important factors if you're choosing to orchestrate, but at least have 1,000 transactions a day so that you can actually run a experiment every single day.
Really thoughtful approach. I like that. Let's do a lightning round. You've done some deep dive articles on some of the biggest players in payments, including Stripe, Adyen, Fiserv. Again, lightning round, quick thought. What is each of those three doing really well? Where do they stand out? And what do you think are some of the competitive threats that each needs to overcome? We'll go one by one. What are they doing well in competitive threats? So first off with Stripe, what are they doing?
I think Stripe is the master at developer experience, right? They revolutionized the game by saying, look, 3 lines of code, easy plugins, get started. And that's a phenomenal concept when you're trying to reach those companies that they were trying to reach at the time that didn't exist yet, right? Hey, we just want to build something. We just want to accept the payment. There you go. Over time, I think the challenges that they've endured, and I think that we're seeing that also in their strategies, expanding into that enterprise level, right? Like they have customers who are doing billions of dollars. They're phenomenal at that. But those tend to be the customers who are just scaling at such a rapid level that they're like, hey, we'll worry about payments at a later stage. As long as it gets accepted and we don't have to worry about it too much and we can get a good deal on it, then it's fine. But managing enterprises, you need better account management. You need better system. You need a little bit more customization or at least tools that allow those companies to feel like they're in charge a lot more. So I think those are the challenges that they have.
Adyen, what are they doing well in competitive threats?
Yeah, I think with Adyen, of course, they've built such a great unified platform that has global reach, right? Like I said, even during my time there, I went through so many different phases. We did acquiring, we did e-com, POS, we went across different regions. And I think they've built probably one of the best unified platforms all on the one deck, the full stack solution that if you're an enterprise company that does that, if you're omni-channel platform, you do payouts, you need a little bit of issuing, they've built such a great platform to do all of that. I think the challenges that they'll have is as you continue to scale, especially in the United States and key markets that are crucial for the further growth of Adyen, you run into the companies that already have such a solid base and is very difficult to get away from, right? You have to deal with the global payments. You have to deal with the Visors of the world. You have to deal with the other competitors that are already there. And I think for them, the challenge then becomes, do you go into those niches and those markets, or do you then go and look and say, what can I do within this market with the tools and the assets that I have? Yeah, to approach companies that are not stuck into those ecosystems that I can apply, but that I normally overlook because I was focused on retail or I was focused on subscription-based businesses or platforms. But now I started looking into that. That could be a little bit of healthcare, but like the healthcare 2.0 startups. Could be other things that maybe have a little bit more higher risk profile. Could be gambling. It could be gaming. It could be other things that they can still have their unified platform and their performance and their data-driven capabilities to really work at it, and then utilizing that. But then also not forgetting the rest of the world, because there's great opportunities everywhere else.
Huge opportunity in emerging markets for sure. All right, last one, Fiserv. What are they really doing well and competitive threats?
Yeah, I think Visor just has that really strong legacy and extensive client base at the core of it. And I think what I see them doing right now is they're buying different companies. I wrote about them this week as well, where I see them buying companies like Pinch Payments in Australia. They bought CCV Group in the Netherlands that has a great POS, and they're trying to expand Clover, which is a great asset for them that it's underutilized in Europe. It's great in the US, but it's non-existent in Europe. That they're with this acquisition, they can do a lot more with it. But I think that's also the danger for them. I think once you become this company that continues to acquire all these different platforms and different things, and you need to modernize your technology stack to be able to compete with all of these agile fintechs like Stripe and Adyen. If they want to move, they can move in an instant, basically. They can pivot, they can go into those markets. Whereas Advisor, either you have to acquire companies and let them do their thing and grow, and at one point start to integrate. But once you have so many of those legacy infrastructures underneath and you're just trying to bolt these things on, are you just buying portfolios, hoping to maximize the profits out of that? Or are you actually going to unify a lot of that makes it a lot more sense? Or do you need to separate it and hopefully not become like some of the other companies that we've seen with that same strategy who are currently now struggling with their valuation and overall growth?
A lot of divestitures happening as well. All right, we're almost out of time. Final question. I like to ask some version of this to all of our guests. If you could share just one piece of advice with SaaS leaders to help them be successful with embedded payments, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think that piece of advice would be, if you're building that payments component within your company, take one or two steps back and really say, what's that vision for the long term? How can I be as flexible? How can I be as data-driven as possible within the infrastructure that I'm building? And how do I bring in the right type of people who understand payments on a deeper level and can actually help me maximize it from the front-end aspect all the way to the back-end aspect of it? Because if you decide to go into embedded payments, you need to understand that becomes a part of the DNA of your company. We've seen it with Shopify, we've seen it with Toast, we've seen it with so many of those other companies who have really embraced it. And now the bulk of their revenue is coming through that. That doesn't mean that you can't do what you're doing or provide that service. You just need to understand it's going to be a big part of it. And choosing the right type of flexible, data-driven payments infrastructure from the outset is a must.
All about the data and the mindset, shifting mental models. Dwayne Gefferie, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate the insights and hearing about your background. Thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.